I'm just reminded of certain situations where, if my project succeeded, somebody else's, KPIs and numbers would go down, and it's
That's
like,
right.
this is hilarious.
Yeah.
You're paying me to do this and it hurts you if I win and we work for the same employer, but at really big companies, it's very common.
And you know what that is, though? It's a lack of clarity of leadership.
I know there's so much more to what you do. You've published several different books in this area. And just briefly, is it possible to kind of connect the dots from organizations to music and to least resistance? Like, how does this all connect?
Okay, let me begin by the nature of the path of least resistance, which 3 of my books have that title in them.
Yeah.
So there are 3 principles here. One is energy moves along the path of resistance. Secondly, the underlying structure will determine the path of least resistance. Like the riverbed will determine where the water flows. And the third principle is you can change the riverbed. You can change the underlying structure. And when you do, you change where it's likely to go. And so the underlying structure of anything will determine its behavior.
Robert, welcome to Growth Stories. So happy to have you on the show. And I think you started consulting back in the 70s. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got started in the first place?
Well, my background is as a composer, and I'm still a composer and I'm a filmmaker. I have a bachelor's and master's in composition from Boston Conservatory. I created a course in the 70s that a lot of people around Boston did. And it really was about the creative process. And some of the folks were from MIT Sloan School of Management. And so Charlie Kiefer, Peter Sanghi, and David Thoreau invited me to join a company together with them. And at first, I wasn't really that interested in organizations per se. I was interested in the creative process and productivity. So there was a good match there. But then I started to see, in working with organizations, that there was something weird going on, that success did not always succeed, for example. And I started to understand, as a composer, I started to understand the underlying dynamics, structural dynamics that were going on in organizations that sometimes made progress difficult.
Yeah.
And unless those structural conflicts were sorted out, people would also have oscillating patterns. An oscillating pattern might be building up capacity and then downsizing, building up capacity, downsizing.
Anyone who's worked in corporate has seen these things that are usually so painful. And one of them comes to mind for me. I won't name the organization, but every year they would promote someone to be like the head of innovation, and then they would immediately fire them later. And it was like, it just happened over and over while I was there. Like, wow, it's just, why don't you just fire them right away?
Though, here's the interesting thing, though. That's exactly the proof of that the underlying structure matters. And by structure, I'm not talking about reporting relationships.
Right.
I'm talking about the way the elements join together in a structure like composition, like a musical composition. So what's typical is someone's not working well in a position. You try everything to improve their performance. Eventually, you replace them with someone else. And 6 months later, the new person's acting exactly like the old person.
Yes. Yeah.
And you think, well, all of the things that we say that are important about human motivation are irrelevant in that situation because the new person may have different college background, different generics, different DNA, different, different astrology, whatever you think is important.
Yeah.
And yet here they are performing consistently with the build of that position.
Yeah, it's almost like the one way I've heard this conceptualized is that the little sections of the organization, it's almost like they're conscious. They behave the same way and you can flip out the components, but the whole system itself kind of maintains whatever.
Yeah, it's not quite that, because that sounds more a little conspiratorial in some ways. It's more like the difference between a rocking chair and a car. And in a rocking chair, it's physics, really. You move forward and the path of least resistance changes. And now it's easier to move backwards. It creates an oscillating pattern. You get into a car, you can move from point A to point B without the car wanting to come back to point A. You may want to, but the car on its own doesn't. Here's something that we see a lot as a follow-up to this example, is that they take a team of executives out to the woods for team building, and let's say they do a whitewater rafting trip.
Yeah, those are the best.
And
skiing.
Everybody falls in love with each other, and they work beautifully together. And then you put them back in the organization, the same structure that they came from. And 6 months later, as if it never happened. And the reason is this proves that those guys could work really well in the right structure. But you put them in a bad structure, one that's dysfunctional. And even if they're very good professionals, The structure itself gives rise to particular patterns of behavior.
Yeah, I love this line of thinking, and I know there's so much more to what you do. You've published several different books on this in this area, and just briefly, is it possible to kind of connect the dots from organizations to music and to least resistance? Like, how does this all connect?
Okay, let me begin by the nature of the path of least resistance, which 3 of my books have that title in them.
Yeah.
And I don't mean the easy way out. I mean, what we know in physics is energy always moves along the path of least resistance. So there are 3 principles here. One is energy moves along the path of least resistance. Secondly, the underlying structure will determine the path of least resistance. Like the riverbed will determine where the water flows. And the third principle is you can change the riverbed. You can change the underlying structure. And when you do, you change where it's likely to go. And so the underlying structure of anything will determine its behavior. Most people don't think structurally. They think situationally. Composers think structurally. They have to. That's what we learn in music school, is how the parts fit together and reinforce each other rather than inadvertently contradict each other. So in terms of composition, I like to think of it as composing the organization, where you have major themes and minor themes and accompaniment. Things really are designed to work together in an aligned system of support rather than inadvertently self-organizing into competing forces.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm just reminded of certain situations where, if my project succeeded, somebody else's, KPIs and numbers would go down. And it's
That's
like,
right.
This is hilarious.
Yeah.
You're paying me to do this, and it hurts you if I win, and we work for the same employer, But at really big companies, it's very common.
And you know what that is, though? It's a lack of clarity of leadership. So I had a client once in a pharmaceutical company, and she was head of the FDA process of approving
Getting
drugs.
things approved to be.
And she was working on an AIDS drug at the time. And she was always seeming to have conflict with the person who was doing drug development. And so eventually I called them both into the room, and we found out that they told her we're doing virology, and they told the other person we're not doing virology. And so, they did not have a personality conflict at all. They were basically trying to follow the directions they thought they were given. And in a situation like that, you have to drive it higher. Gee, boss, are we doing virology or not?
Yeah.
Give us an answer. Because the way that you've told us is we are and we aren't. And these kinds of lack of clarity, often from senior management, creates structural conflicts which create an oscillating pattern.
Yeah. And I'm sure so many listeners to this will have experienced something like that. Everyone I know who's worked in a larger organization, like this isn't a rare event. It happens all the time. And it seems to happen kind of organically, like without any structure.
It doesn't just to say it doesn't happen organically. It happens. It's a structure. Maybe it's organic in the sense that nobody's thinking structurally.
That's
so in
kind
that
of what
sense,
I mean. Like
it
just seems
organically
to
develops.
Pop up. Yeah.
Yeah, but it really comes from lack of design, lack of understanding how the parts fit together and how they need to fit together. One telltale sign, that's the right word, of this is when departments in an organization compete against each other for the same resource base. It basically shows them they don't know what their capacity costs them and how to distribute capacity in relationship to specific goals.
A lot of the things you're mentioning remind me of other management systems. Like, for example, when you said capacity and describing this, I was thinking about lean for some reason. And I thought, there's a chart. There's one chart I know for capacity alignment across groups. How does this fit into other systems that might be, what's the right word, more well marketed or more well known than the path of least resistance, and looking at it from a composition?
Actually, in my latest version, there's a few different versions I've written of path of least resistance for managers. And in the latest one, which is the 2011 one, I actually have a chapter called The New Lean. What I'm describing there, because traditional lean is based on problem-driven things.
Yes, it's always a problem. Yeah.
Yeah. And what I say in that is that if you have a startup, you can't use lean until you screw things up and then you can use it.
Well, no revenue could be the first problem, that's
Well,
Yeah.
So there's a difference between companies that are problem driven and companies that are outcome driven. And we really tried to transform them from problem to outcome driven orientations. And so in this new lean process, it has a lot of the same very good technical things like minimize handoffs and have things in the right location. So, like a lot of really practical good stuff. But it begins with the outcome in mind, not the problem you're trying to solve. So what is the outcome you want? Where are you now in relationship to that? We call that structural tension. And what actions do you need to take to move from where you are to where you want to be? And that then becomes the action plan for putting into practice some of these really good principles.
Love it. Yeah. I keep thinking of, not that useful music analogies. I don't know why my brain is thinking of random music stuff. But yes, tension is, I guess, the word that made me think of that. And I'm curious, especially for people starting up a consultancy, you've been doing this for a while and you're very well established. But I'd love to hear the difference between, how were you finding your first clients versus, how you're growing now? Because there's always, the very first is, for a lot of people, it's your internal network. And then as you grow, you sort of have to change out the engine to find new people to help. I'd love to hear about that journey.
You have the advantage of being a best-selling author.
Okay. Yeah. So you're saying you have the advantage of being a best-selling author, which is a good advantage. Yeah.
Well, it is. And the reason it is because usually the people who want to work with us already know what I'm on about. And so that does help. So it's hard for me to say, well, if you're not a best-selling author, here's how you do it. But I do have some recommendations, though, because we train consultants. And one of the things we recommend that they do is to begin by volunteering for nonprofits and really getting in there and doing work and then seeing the efficacy of their work. And then from that, they actually have a track record and then can begin to add clients for pay and so on. And we still do nonprofit work always for
This is a very common and super reasonable advice. When you start up, you don't have evidence of that you can, and you might actually also be lacking experience. Maybe you have some good ideas, but you don't know for sure if you follow them like end to end what's going to happen. So basically volunteering is a great way to build up case studies. And
another is to find a consultant who is working with the kind of clients you want to work with. And when I started to work in organizations, the first thing I did was sit in the back of the room and get coffee for people, while I was kind of learning what was going on. And that was good, though, because I could really see some of the dynamics that were in operation that I hadn't known about because I came from the music world.
I wonder, would you stop me if this isn't going to be fun for you, and we'll cut this out, but I'm just curious, would it be fun to talk about how it goes back to music? Do you want to talk about that at all?
Well, I thought I had when I mentioned major themes and sub-themes and accompaniment.
Yeah.
But, what we understand in music, though, is the structural dynamics of why you could move music from one place to another. And it's really based on tension resolution systems, the same way a dramatic storytelling is. Boy meets girl, boy loses girl. You want to see them back together. Tension, resolution to get back together. That plot never gets old.
It doesn't seem to, that and the hero's journey. Well, in music, there's more tense music, right? There's people that like to play with tension. And I'm curious, is there purpose to designing it in?
No, it's not just about that. Harmonically, the way harmony works to begin with is always attention, like it's a home chord, and then there's a dominant chord away from home and then back to home. And so the way that harmony works to begin with, from the simplest rock and roll to Beethoven, it all works the same way in terms of built-in tension. Same way your muscles do. You move your arm, you've got different muscle groups that some of them relax and some of them tense. That's how the structure works. So in organizations, in a very similar way, we talked about competing groups. It's because the goals are contradictory to each other. Well, who set those goals?
Right.
How did they come about? How did it turn out that you reward this person for quality and you reward that person for quantity, and now they hate each other?
Yeah.
And, if you moved them around, they would still hate each other.
They'd switch. Yeah, they'd switch points of view for sure. Yeah.
And these are really structural matters. They're not personal. I take somebody out, put somebody else in, they're going to in that structure, they will operate exactly the same way. And so music is a structural discipline and organizations are structural disciplines.
Love it. Well, thank you so much, Robert. And I'm curious, for anyone who's watching this episode, what is the ideal type of company that should get a hold of you to improve their structure and to have more harmony in their organizations? Like who are you best set up to serve?
Funnily enough, successful companies.
Yeah.
versus, for example, the problem children companies.
Yeah.
Because
no one thinks they're a problem child, do they? Is there anyone who? Okay.
Sure. They're losing market share. They're losing money. Yeah. Management is completely on each other's heels. Mm-hmm. Everyone in the organization is stressed and strained up to the kazoo. So the companies we love to work with are ones that really want to expand their aspirations and their values and reach, and have already have a pretty good track record of doing that to begin with.
Makes sense. And how should they get a hold of you if they see this episode?
Yeah, it's www.robertfritz.com, one word.
Perfect.
And of course, the first thing I would recommend is to go on Amazon and look up my books.
Definitely.